She pushed me while I was 3 months pregnant, and as I lay at the bottom of the stairs, bleeding, she didn't look afraid. She looked satisfied. Why would my own sister try to kill me over a baby that was never her husband's? My name is Jennifer Brooks. I'm 34 years old, a senior accountant at a mid-size firm in Connecticut. On paper, I have a stable career, my own home, and the kind of quiet, predictable life that most people would call safe. But today, I'm not telling you about spreadsheets or tax audits. I'm telling you about the afternoon my sister pushed me down a staircase because she believed I was carrying her husband's child, and the truth that unraveled afterward. For most of my life, I thought the deepest pain a person could feel was being invisible inside their own family. I grew up believing I was the strong one, the one who didn't need help, the one who could handle things. That's what my mother always told me. Jennifer is independent, she would say proudly to relatives. Melissa needs me more. Melissa is my younger sister, 3 years younger, but somehow always the center of gravity in our house. She was delicate, sensitive, emotional, the one my mother rushed to comfort, the one who got protected, defended, excused. I was the capable one, the quiet one, the one who didn't cry loudly enough to be noticed. Over time, I stopped trying. I built my own life instead. I moved out at 22. I paid off my student loans alone. I bought my first house at 28. I never asked my family for money. I never asked for much of anything. Actually, somewhere along the way, independence became my armor, and invisibility became normal. 5 years ago, Melissa married Mark Thompson, a successful attorney with kind eyes and a calm voice. He was thoughtful, measured, the kind of man who always listened more than he spoke. They looked perfect together, the beautiful, fragile wife and the steady, successful husband. At family gatherings, they were the couple everyone admired. Mark and I barely spoke outside of holidays. There was never anything inappropriate between us. The only significant interaction we ever had happened 3 years ago, when my ex-boyfriend scammed me out of $15,000 in a fraudulent investment scheme. I was humiliated and embarrassed. Mark offered to help me recover the money quietly. He did, and I was so grateful that I bought him an expensive fountain pen as a thank you gift. It was a simple gesture, professional, harmless. I never thought about that pen again. Until the night, everything changed. But before I get there, I need to tell you about Daniel. Daniel Morrison is my neighbor, a widowed engineer in his late 40s, with a soft laugh and steady hands. We started talking one afternoon while he was fixing his fence. He didn't interrupt me when I spoke. He didn't rush to fill silences. He made me feel seen in a way I hadn't realized I'd been missing my entire life. We dated quietly for a year. I didn't introduce him to my family. I already knew what they would say. Too old. A widower. Are you sure that's wise? I was tired of defending my happiness. 3 months before the fall, I found out I was pregnant. I remember sitting in my bathroom, staring at the test in my hand, feeling something I hadn't felt in years' certainty. I wasn't afraid. I wasn't ashamed. I was hopeful. Daniel was overjoyed. He cried when I told him. He held my face in his hands and said, "We're going to do this right." But when it came to my family, I hesitated. I wanted to tell them. I wanted, just once, to share something good without it turning into a comparison or interrogation. So, when I finally announced the pregnancy at Sunday dinner, I chose not to reveal the father's name yet. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself I just needed time. The room went silent. No congratulations, no smiles. My mother's first words were, "Who's the father?" Her tone wasn't curious. It was suspicious. I laughed lightly, trying to ease the tension. "I'll tell you soon," I said. Melissa didn't laugh. She stared at my stomach in a way that made my skin prickle, like she was searching for something hidden beneath my clothes. After dinner, my mother pulled her into the kitchen. I couldn't hear what they said, but when Melissa came back out, her face looked pale, tight. As I was gathering my coat to leave, Melissa grabbed my arm. Her grip was stronger than I expected. "That pen you gave Mark," she whispered. "I found it in his drawer last week. He still has it." I blinked. "Okay? Why would he keep it?" she pressed. unless it meant something. My stomach dropped. I had never told her about that pen. The only person I had ever mentioned it to was my mother, casually, years ago, during a conversation about the scam and how Mark had helped me. I brushed it off that night. I told myself Melissa was overthinking. Marriage can be stressful. People project fears. I didn't want to assume the worst. But the phone calls started the next day. Melissa began calling me every evening, sometimes twice. Have you seen Mark recently? Did he ever say anything about me to you? Where were you Tuesday afternoon? The questions circled the same territory without ever landing. I answered honestly every time. I had nothing to hide. Still, her voice always carried a strange edge, a tremor beneath the surface. Meanwhile, my mother started calling more often too, checking in, asking casual questions about Daniel without directly mentioning his name. Commenting that it was unusual, I hadn't introduced the father yet. At the time, I didn't know she was also calling Melissa daily. I didn't know she was saying things like, I drove past Mark's office and thought I saw Jennifer's car. She still won't say who the father is. A mother can sense when something's wrong. None of it was true. But suspicion doesn't need truth. It only needs repetition. 2 weeks later, my mother called me on a Sunday morning. Her voice sounded unusually warm. I found some baby clothes in the attic, she said. From when you and Melissa were little. I thought you might want them. For a moment, just a small, foolish moment, I thought maybe this was her way of reaching out. Maybe she was excited about becoming a grandmother. Come by this afternoon, she added. Melissa's here too. You girls can sort through them. Something in my chest tightened. I couldn't explain it. Nothing she said was threatening. Nothing sounded wrong. But there was a heaviness behind her words, like a door quietly closing somewhere I couldn't see. If I had listened to that instinct, maybe things would have unfolded differently. But I didn't. I grabbed my keys, kissed Daniel goodbye, and drove to my mother's house unaware that I was walking into a trap carefully constructed out of whispers, insecurity, and a single, harmless pen. And by the time I reached the top of that staircase, my sister had already decided the baby inside me was her husband's, and that I deserved to fall. If you had met us as children, you probably would have thought we were just a normal family. 2 daughters, a hardworking father at least in the early years, a devoted mother who seemed endlessly attentive. From the outside, nothing looked broken. But families like mine don't crack loudly. They fracture quietly, in patterns so subtle you don't recognize them until you're already shaped by them. Melissa is 3 years younger than me. Growing up, she was described with words like delicate, emotional, sensitive. I was described as strong, responsible, mature for my age. At first, those words sounded like compliments. It took me years to understand they were assignments. Whenever Melissa cried, my mother rushed to her side. If I cried, I was told, "You're stronger than that, Jennifer." If Melissa forgot her homework, it was because she was overwhelmed. If I forgot mine, it was because I should have known better. The standards were never spoken out loud, but they were clear. Melissa was the one who needed protecting. I was the one who needed to endure. There's a specific memory I carry with me. I must have been around 9. Melissa had knocked over a glass of juice onto one of my school projects. I remember standing there, staring at the soaked cardboard and smeared marker ink, trying not to cry. My mother came into the room, took one look at Melissa's trembling lip, and said, "Jennifer, don't overreact. It was an accident. Your sister feels bad enough already." I ended up apologizing for being upset. That was the rhythm of our childhood. Melissa's emotions filled the room. Mine learned to shrink. By the time I reached high school, I had already stopped competing for attention. It felt pointless. My mother often said, "Jennifer doesn't need me the way Melissa does." She said it proudly, as if she had raised one self-sufficient daughter and one tender-hearted one. But what she meant was that she had decided which of us required her love more and which of us could survive without it. So I survived. I worked hard. I kept my grades up. I got into college on scholarships and part-time jobs. I moved out at 22 and never moved back. I told myself independence was freedom, but sometimes it was just loneliness with better lighting. Melissa, on the other hand, stayed close to home. Even after she finished school, she called our mother daily, sometimes multiple times a day. They had a kind of intimacy I couldn't quite access, shared glances, private jokes, whispered conversations in the kitchen during family gatherings. I wasn't excluded openly, I was just peripheral. When Melissa met Mark Thompson, my mother adored him immediately. Mark was a successful attorney, well-spoken and steady. He came from a respectable family. He had the kind of career that impressed neighbors. I remember my mother introducing him to relatives like she had personally negotiated the marriage. "Isn't he wonderful?" she would say, watching Melissa beam beside him. To be fair, Mark was kind to me too. Polite, measured. He never treated me like an outsider. But we didn't have a close relationship. We saw each other at holidays, exchanged small talk about work and weather, and that was it. The only time our lives intersected meaningfully was 3 years ago, when I was still recovering from a humiliating breakup. My ex-boyfriend, Kevin, had convinced me to invest in what turned out to be a fraudulent scheme. I lost $15,000, money I had saved carefully over years. I felt stupid, ashamed. I didn't tell my family at first because I didn't want to hear, "You should have known better." Mark found out through Melissa and offered to help. He reviewed the paperwork, made a few calls, and within months, most of my money was recovered through legal pressure. I was deeply grateful. I bought him an expensive fountain pen as a thank you gift. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't secretive. It was appreciation. I remember giving it to him at a family barbecue. Melissa was inside helping our mother prepare food. Mark looked surprised but pleased. "You didn't have to do that," he said. "Just be more careful next time." There was no lingering glance, no charged moment, just a simple exchange. Later that afternoon, when Melissa and my mother rejoined us, I mentioned casually that I had given Mark a small thank you gift for helping me. My mother nodded thoughtfully. I didn't notice the way her eyes lingered just a second too long. Looking back now, I wonder if that was the moment something shifted. Melissa's marriage, at least publicly, appeared stable. But over the past year before my pregnancy announcement, I noticed subtle changes in her. She seemed more anxious, more watchful. She would ask strange questions during family dinners. "Do you think Mark works too late?" Or, "Do you ever feel like people change after marriage?" At the time, I assumed it was normal insecurity. Marriage is complicated. Everyone adjusts differently. I didn't know how much those insecurities were being fed. My mother and Melissa spoke constantly. I know that's normal for many families. But their conversations often ended with Melissa looking unsettled, not reassured. Once, I overheard my mother saying, "You have to pay attention to signs, sweetheart. Not every woman is as innocent as she pretends." I thought it was generic advice. I didn't realize it was about me. When I met Daniel, I kept him separate from my family, partly out of habit and partly out of instinct. Daniel was different from the men I had dated before. He was older, yes, but more importantly, he was grounded. After losing his wife to cancer years earlier, he carried a quiet patience with him. He didn't rush decisions. He didn't perform emotions for an audience. He made me feel steady. For the first time in my life, I felt chosen, not compared. And maybe that, too, unsettled something in the dynamics of my family. When I told my mother I was dating someone seriously, she asked minimal questions. When I said I wasn't ready to introduce him yet, she didn't push, but her silence felt measured. Melissa, on the other hand, seemed almost overly curious. "Is he someone I know?" she asked once. "Does Mark know him?" I laughed it off, thinking it was harmless curiosity. But I can see now how the puzzle pieces were already being rearranged behind my back. Growing up, I believed my sister and I were simply different. She needed more reassurance. I needed less. I thought our roles were natural, maybe even fair. What I didn't understand was how carefully those roles had been cultivated, how comparison had been used like a slow drip, shaping us both. Melissa learned to rely on my mother's voice as her compass. I learned to silence mine. So when doubt began creeping into Melissa's marriage, when small insecurities surfaced, instead of fading, who do you think she turned to? And whose name do you think began appearing in those whispered kitchen conversations? Mine. I didn't see it happening. I was too busy building my own life, believing that distance equaled safety. But distance doesn't protect you from narratives being written about you. By the time I stood at the top of that staircase weeks later, facing my sister's trembling hands and wild eyes, the story she believed about me had already been repeated enough times to feel like truth. And in her mind, I wasn't the strong, independent sister anymore. I was the threat. The night I told my family I was pregnant should have been simple. Not perfect, not cinematic. Just warm. A small moment of shared joy over Sunday dinner. Instead, it felt like I had dropped a glass in the center of the table and watched the cracks spread silently in every direction. We were sitting in my mother's dining room, the same one where Melissa and I had done homework as kids, where birthdays were celebrated and quiet comparisons were made between bites of food. The air smelled like roasted chicken and rosemary. Everything looked normal. That was the unsettling part. "I have some news," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I remember resting my hand lightly over my stomach, not dramatically, just instinctively. "I'm pregnant." There was a pause. Not the kind where people gasp and then cheer. The kind where forks freeze halfway to mouths. My mother was the first to speak. "Who's the father?" Not congratulations. Not how are you feeling. Just that. I forced a small smile. "I'll tell you soon. I just wanted to share the news first." Melissa's gaze dropped to my stomach, and something flickered across her face. It wasn't happiness. It wasn't even confusion. It looked like calculation, as if she were running through possibilities only she could see. The rest of dinner passed in fragments. My mother asked neutral questions about my health. Melissa barely spoke. Mark seemed unaware of the undercurrent, making polite conversation about work and traffic. I tried to convince myself I was imagining the tension. Maybe this was just shock. Maybe they needed time. After dessert, I saw my mother touch Melissa's arm and guide her quietly into the kitchen. The door didn't close fully, but their voices dropped low enough that I couldn't hear words, only tone. It wasn't soothing. It wasn't celebratory. It sounded urgent. When Melissa came back out, she looked pale. As I was putting on my coat to leave, she stepped closer and grabbed my arm. Her fingers pressed harder than necessary. "That pen you gave Mark," she said softly. "I found it in his drawer last week." I blinked, confused by the sudden shift. "Okay? He still has it," she continued. "Why would he keep it? After all this time?" My mind struggled to catch up. "It was a thank you gift, Melissa. He helped me recover money from Kevin's scam. You know that." She stared at me as if she were searching my face for a crack. "You never told me it meant nothing," she whispered. I felt something cold slide down my spine. I had mentioned the pen casually to my mother years ago, but I had never had a private conversation with Melissa about it. There had been no secrecy because there had been nothing to hide. "You're reading into it," I said gently. "It was just a pen." She didn't respond. She let go of my arm and stepped back, her expression tightening into something I didn't recognize. The next morning, my phone rang at 7:12 a.m. "Melissa." I almost didn't answer, but I did. "Did you see Mark this week?" she asked without greeting. "No," I said, startled. "Why would I?" There was a pause. "Just wondering." The calls continued. Every day. Sometimes twice. "Has Mark seemed distant lately? Where were you Tuesday afternoon? Do you think it's strange when people hide things?" The questions weren't direct accusations. They circled, prodded, suggested. I answered honestly each time. I told her about work, about doctor's appointments, about Daniel, though I still didn't say his name. I kept waiting for her to relax, for the tension in her voice to ease. It never did. Meanwhile, my mother began calling more frequently too. Her tone was calm, almost sympathetic. "Melissa seems anxious," she would say. "Marriage can be hard. You should be patient with her." Patient about what? I wanted to ask. But instead, I nodded into the phone and said I understood. What I didn't know, what I wouldn't know until much later, was that my mother wasn't just calming Melissa. She was feeding her. "I drove past Mark's office yesterday," she reportedly told her. I could have sworn I saw Jennifer's car in the parking lot. That never happened. She still won't tell anyone who the father of that baby is. Doesn't that seem suspicious? It was my choice to share that information when I felt ready. But in my mother's retelling, it became concealment. I'm not saying anything happened, she would add carefully, but a mother notices patterns. Patterns. The word sounds harmless, logical, but repetition turns suggestion into certainty. About 10 days after the dinner, my neighbor Mrs. Patterson stopped me while I was getting my mail. "A woman was outside your house yesterday," she said. "Dark hair. Looked like your sister. She just stood there for a while." My stomach tightened. "Did she say anything?" "No, just stared at the windows." I laughed lightly, brushing it off. She probably meant to stop by and changed her mind. But that night, I lay awake, replaying the image of Melissa sitting in her car, watching my house. The email arrived 2 days later. It was from Mark. Subject line: quick question. He explained he had found old documents from my case with Kevin while cleaning out his office. He wanted to return them. He also mentioned, almost as an aside, that he was worried about Melissa. "She's been acting distant and paranoid," he wrote. "Has she said anything to you? Can we talk?" The message was polite, concerned, nothing more. I stared at it for a long moment before replying briefly that we could meet in a public place to exchange the documents and that I hoped things improved between them. I didn't know I wasn't the only one reading that email. Years ago, my mother had insisted on keeping what she called a master list of family passwords for emergencies. It had seemed practical at the time. Overprotective, maybe, but harmless. Mark had likely forgotten he ever gave her access. She hadn't. She logged into his account. She found the message. And she forwarded it to Melissa with a single line in the subject field. "Thought you should see this." No commentary, no explanation, just the email. To a woman already drowning in suspicion, the phrase, "Can we talk?" became confirmation. Worried about Melissa became evidence of conspiracy. The fact that I hadn't named the father of my baby became motive. When Melissa called me that night, her voice sounded hollow. "I saw the email," she said. "What email?" "Don't pretend," she snapped. "You think I'm stupid." My heart pounded. "Melissa, I have no idea what you're talking about." "The baby," she whispered. "It's his, isn't it?" I felt the ground shift beneath me. "There is nothing between me and Mark," I said slowly. "Nothing." She hung up. I should have gone to her house. I should have forced a conversation face to face. But I was tired of defending myself against shadows. I told myself this would pass. That marriage stress can twist perception, that my sister would calm down. What I didn't understand was that her fear wasn't fading. It was being sharpened. Every day my mother added another detail, another observation, another carefully placed doubt. By the time my mother called that Sunday morning and invited me over to pick up baby clothes from the attic, Melissa had been living inside a narrative where I wasn't her sister. I was the woman stealing her husband. And in that version of the story, I wasn't invisible anymore. I was the villain. The morning my mother called about the baby clothes, her voice sounded softer than it had in weeks, almost nostalgic. "I found some things in the attic," she said. "Little sweaters, blankets, things from when you and Melissa were babies. I thought you might want them." For a split second, I let myself believe this was progress. Maybe the tension from dinner had settled. Maybe my pregnancy was finally real to her in a way that softened whatever suspicions she'd been holding. "That's sweet," I said carefully. "I can stop by this afternoon." "Good," she replied. "Melissa's here too. You girls can go through everything together." The words should have comforted me. Instead, something inside my chest tightened. Not fear exactly, more like pressure. A quiet, internal warning that I didn't quite know how to name. After I hung up, I stood in my kitchen for a long moment, staring at nothing. Daniel was at the counter pouring coffee. He noticed my silence immediately. "Everything okay?" he asked. "Mom found baby clothes in the attic," I said. "She wants me to come over." Daniel studied my face the way he always did when he sensed something beneath my words. "You want me to go with you?" I almost said yes. But pride or maybe habit made me shake my head. "No, it's fine. I just feel weird about it. He stepped closer and kissed my forehead. Call me if anything feels off. Those words lingered. As I grabbed my purse, I hesitated. The unease I'd been brushing aside for 2 weeks felt heavier now. Melissa's phone calls, the accusations about the pen, the email, the way her voice had sharpened when she mentioned the baby. Maybe it was pregnancy hormones. Maybe I was being dramatic. Still, before I left, I did something I'd never done before. I opened the voice memo app on my phone and pressed record. It felt paranoid, almost embarrassing, but I slipped the phone into my jacket pocket with the microphone facing upward. Then, as an extra precaution, one I couldn't fully explain, I called Daniel. When he answered, I told him casually, "I'm heading to my mom's." As I searched for my keys, I set the phone down without hanging up. The call stayed connected. I didn't know at the time how important that decision would be. I only knew I didn't trust the calm. The drive to my mother's house was quiet. The neighborhood looked the same as always, lawns trimmed, curtains drawn, the kind of suburban stillness that hides everything messy behind closed doors. When I pulled into the driveway, Melissa's car was already there. I took a breath before stepping out. My mother opened the door almost immediately, as if she'd been waiting. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Sweetheart," she said, brushing my cheek lightly, "you look tired." "I'm pregnant," I replied, trying to keep the mood light. She laughed softly. "The clothes are upstairs. Melissa's already looking through some boxes." Before I could respond, she grabbed her purse from the entry table. "Oh, I just remembered I need to run to the pharmacy. It won't take long. You two go ahead." The timing felt too precise. "You're leaving?" I asked. "Just for 15 minutes, she said breezily. "This is a good chance for you girls to talk." The front door closed behind her before I could say anything else. The house fell into a silence that felt thick and unnatural. No television, no music, just the faint hum of the refrigerator somewhere in the background. I moved toward the staircase slowly. Each step felt heavier than it should have. At the top of the stairs, Melissa was standing in the hallway. She wasn't holding baby clothes. She was waiting. Her arms were crossed tightly over her chest. Her face looked pale, almost gray under the soft hallway light. Her eyes were rimmed red, like she hadn't slept in days. "Hi," I said cautiously. She didn't smile. "I know," she said. The words were barely louder than a whisper. "Know what?" I asked. Her jaw tightened. "About you and Mark." My stomach dropped. "Melissa, we've talked about this. Don't lie to me." Her voice cracked, sudden and sharp. "I saw the email. Can we talk? You think I'm stupid?" "There is nothing between me and your husband," I said firmly. "Nothing. The baby is not his." She took a step closer. I instinctively stepped back, my heel brushing the edge of the top stair. "Then why won't you tell anyone who the father is?" she demanded. "Because it's my choice," I said, struggling to stay calm. "Because I don't owe anyone an explanation on your timeline." Her breathing grew heavier. "Mom saw you near his office." "That never happened." She said she felt something was wrong. The realization hit me slowly, like cold water spreading through my veins. This wasn't just insecurity. This was scripting. "Melissa," I said carefully, "what exactly has Mom been telling you?" Her expression shifted, not confusion, but something closer to doubt fighting with certainty. "She wouldn't lie to me," she said automatically. "She logged into Mark's email," I said. "She had his password. Did you know that?" Melissa blinked, the smallest crack. "You're twisting this," she whispered. "No," I replied. "I'm telling you the truth. The baby's father is Daniel, my neighbor, the man I've been dating for a year." Her eyes flickered, but the storm inside them didn't calm. "Stop saying that," she snapped. "You've been laughing at me this whole time." "I have never laughed at you," I said, my voice breaking. "I'm your sister." For a brief second, something human passed over her face, fear, maybe. But then her gaze dropped to my stomach. "That baby," she said slowly, "is his." Before I could react, her hands shot forward. They hit my chest with a force that didn't feel impulsive. It felt committed. My foot slipped on the edge of the top stair. The world tilted. And then I was falling. I remember every impact. my shoulders striking the railing, my back slamming against wood, the sharp crack of my head hitting the floor at the bottom, the air rushing out of my lungs in one violent burst. For a moment, everything went white. Then came the warmth, blood pooling beneath my hair, my ears ringing. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. Through blurred vision, I looked up. Melissa stood at the top of the stairs, staring down at me. Her expression was no longer wild. It was calm. "No one will believe you," she said quietly. "Mom already knows you're a liar." Footsteps approached the front door. My mother's voice floated into the hallway. "I'm back!" The timing was perfect. She rushed toward me with rehearsed alarm. "Oh my God! What happened?" Melissa's voice trembled now, convincingly. "She slipped." I tried to grab her. "Tell them she tripped," my mother whispered urgently. "You tried to catch her but couldn't reach her in time. Do you understand?" I tried to speak, tried to tell them I heard everything. But darkness was already pulling me under. The last thing I remember before losing consciousness was the faint awareness of my phone still recording inside my jacket pocket and the distant sound of Daniel's voice through the open call, shouting my name. When I opened my eyes, the first thing I noticed was the light. Harsh, white, clinical. It felt like it was cutting straight through my skull. For a few seconds, I didn't know where I was. Then the pain arrived deep, pulsing, radiating from the back of my head down into my spine. Hospital. I tried to move and immediately regretted it. A sharp ache shot through my shoulder and ribs. My hand instinctively flew to my stomach. The baby. That was the only thought that mattered. A nurse noticed I was awake and called for the doctor. Within minutes, a woman in a pale blue coat stood beside my bed, her expression calm but serious. "Miss Brooks," she said gently, "you had a significant fall. You sustained a concussion, multiple bruises, and a mild fracture in your shoulder. But I need you to listen carefully. Your baby has a heartbeat, strong and steady." The relief hit me so hard I started crying before I could stop myself. "She's okay?" I whispered. "Yes," the doctor said, "but we're keeping you for observation." She hesitated, glancing down at her clipboard before looking back at me. Her voice shifted slightly, not colder, but firmer. "There's something else," she continued. "Your injuries. They aren't entirely consistent with a simple fall." My heart skipped. "There are clear signs of force applied from behind," she explained carefully. "The pattern of bruising on your upper back and the angle of impact suggest you may have been pushed. Because you're pregnant, we're legally obligated to report any suspected assault to law enforcement." The word assault echoed in my ears. I didn't have to invent anything. I didn't have to prove anything yet. The evidence was already written across my body. Within an hour, 2 detectives arrived, a man and a woman, both professional, composed. They introduced themselves and asked if I felt well enough to speak. For the first time in my life, I didn't soften the truth. I told them everything. The dinner announcement, the pen, the phone calls, the email, the confrontation at the top of the stairs, the push, my mother coaching Melissa afterward. I didn't downplay. I didn't protect anyone. When I finished, I reached toward the chair where someone had placed my jacket. "My phone," I said. The female detective retrieved it and handed it to me. "I recorded everything," I told them. "It's still there." The voice memo had been running for 47 minutes, long enough to capture the argument, long enough to record Melissa's accusation, the sound of my body hitting each step, and her chilling words at the top of the stairs. Long enough to capture my mother walking in and instructing her on what to tell paramedics. Daniel had also heard the confrontation live through the open call. The detectives exchanged a look. "We'll need to extract the audio formally," the male detective said. "But if what you're describing is on this recording, it's significant." Significant. It felt like an understatement. They left with my phone, promising to return after the forensic team processed the file. Not long after, I heard raised voices outside my hospital room. "My mother. I'm her mother," she was saying sharply. "You can't keep me from seeing my own daughter." The nurse's voice remained steady. "She has requested no visitors." I had made that request the moment I regained enough clarity to speak. No contact. No calls transferred. No access. When security escorted them away, I felt something inside me shift, not relief exactly, but clarity. For 34 years, I had twisted myself into shapes trying to maintain peace in that family. Now, lying in a hospital bed, with stitches in my scalp and a brace around my shoulder, peace no longer mattered. Truth did. Daniel arrived 20 minutes later, his face pale and eyes red. He had heard the fall. He had heard Melissa's voice. He had heard my mother's instructions. "I tried calling," he said hoarsely, taking my hand. "Over and over." "I know," I whispered. "You saved me." He shook his head, but we both understood what I meant. If not for that recording, if not for that call, this might have become another accident, rewritten into family history. The next few days blurred together in a rhythm of medical checks and quiet conversations with investigators. The forensic team confirmed the recording was authentic and unaltered. Every word was clear. "That baby is his, isn't it?" Melissa's voice played through the speaker during my official statement. Then the sound of the push. Then her whisper. "No one will believe you. Mom already knows you're a liar." And my mother's voice afterward, low and urgent. "Tell them she tripped." It was no longer my word against theirs. It was evidence. At the recommendation of the detectives and my newly hired attorney, I agreed to a prenatal paternity test. Not because I doubted Daniel, not because I needed validation, but because Melissa's accusation had become part of the criminal investigation, it needed to be addressed directly. The test was called NIPT-based paternity screening. A simple blood draw from me, a cheek swab from Daniel, safe for the baby. The results would take about a week. Those 7 days stretched endlessly. Meanwhile, police interviewed Mark. According to the detectives, he looked stunned when they played the recording for him. "I never had an affair with Jennifer," he told them firmly. "This is insane." He confirmed that my mother had once insisted on keeping a list of passwords for emergencies. He admitted he had forgotten about it entirely. Digital forensics traced the forwarded email back to my mother's phone. She had logged into Mark's account, found the message, and sent it to Melissa without explanation. But that wasn't all. In her deleted drafts folder, investigators recovered several unsent emails, written as if from me to Mark, romantic in tone, suggestive, fabricated. She had never sent them, but they were there, prepared, waiting, backup ammunition. When my attorney, Sandra Chen, showed me copies of those drafts, my hands shook so badly I had to set them down. My mother hadn't just fed Melissa doubts. She had been constructing a narrative. Melissa was arrested and released on bail pending formal charges of assault causing bodily harm. A no-contact order was issued immediately. She was prohibited from approaching me or communicating in any form. When the paternity results arrived, Daniel sat beside me as I opened the envelope. Probability of paternity: 99.99%. Mark Thompson, excluded. There it was. Clean, clinical, final. The baby had always been Daniel's. Melissa's accusation collapsed under the weight of science. But the investigation didn't stop there, because this wasn't just about jealousy anymore. It was about orchestration. As more evidence surfaced, text messages between my mother and Melissa, repeated suggestions, planted doubts, the detectives began to see what I was only beginning to understand. My sister hadn't exploded out of nowhere. She had been guided there. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't just surviving the family narrative. I was dismantling it. Once the recording was authenticated, and the paternity results confirmed what I had known all along, the case shifted. It was no longer just about a sister who lost control. It became about how she got there, and who had been standing behind her the entire time. The detectives began pulling phone records and text messages between my mother and Melissa. What they found wasn't a single dramatic instruction or an explicit command. It was something far more insidious. A pattern. Hundreds of messages over months, small comments, suggestions disguised as concern, observations framed as maternal intuition. I drove past Mark's office today, thought I saw Jennifer's car. She still hasn't told anyone who the father is. I just feel like something isn't right. You have to protect your marriage, sweetheart. Read individually, they looked harmless. even protective. But stacked together, day after day, they formed a steady drip of doubt. A narrative reinforced so often, it began to feel factual. Melissa eventually agreed to a formal interrogation in the presence of her attorney. According to the detectives, she held her composure at first. She insisted she had acted out of betrayal, that she had been certain I was lying, that she had lost control in the heat of the moment. Then, they played the recording. They let her hear her own voice. They let her hear mine. They let her hear our mother coaching her afterward. Something shifted. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just went quiet. Mom told me Jennifer was lying, she finally said. Mom showed me the emails. Mom said she saw them together. The detective leaned forward. Did you ever see them together yourself? Silence. No, Melissa admitted. The questions kept coming, gently but firmly. Over hours, pieces began to fall into place. Melissa described the daily phone calls, the warnings, the subtle reminders that I had always been competitive, that I resented her happiness, that I had always needed to prove something. It was strange hearing those words secondhand. I had never felt competitive with Melissa. I had simply tried to exist without causing conflict. But in my mother's retelling of our childhood, my independence had apparently transformed into quiet rivalry. The investigators subpoenaed my mother's phone. Deleted messages were recovered. So were the draft emails written in my name, fabricated confessions of an affair that had never happened. She hadn't sent them. She hadn't needed to. The threat of them had been enough. When Sandra brought me a thick folder containing the recovered evidence, I wasn't prepared for how deeply it would cut. There were timestamps stretching back not just weeks, but years. Casual comparisons, subtle digs, reminders that I had always been hard to read, that I kept secrets, that I didn't need anyone. The narrative wasn't new. It had just evolved. Then, about 2 weeks into the investigation, something unexpected happened. A news segment covered the case, careful not to reveal too many details, but enough to draw attention. That coverage prompted a call to the police from someone I hadn't spoken to in over 20 years. Mrs. Delgado. She had lived next door to us when we were children. I remembered her garden, the way she always wore wide-brimmed hats in summer. I hadn't thought about her in decades. She told detectives she had witnessed something when I was 14. A bicycle accident, or what I had always believed was an accident. According to her statement, Melissa had pushed me off my bike during an argument in the driveway. I had fallen hard, fracturing my arm. My mother had been standing nearby. She had seen the push, but when paramedics arrived, she told them I had lost balance, that I was clumsy, that Melissa had tried to help me. I remember that day vividly now, the shame I felt, being scolded for overreacting while my arm throbbed in pain. I remember my mother telling relatives I had always been careless. I had believed her. For 20 years, I had carried that memory as evidence of my own fault. But it hadn't been an accident. It had been a rehearsal. When Sandra relayed Mrs. Delgado's testimony to me, I stared at the faint scar along my forearm. It felt like my past was being rewritten in real time. Not to change it, but to reveal what had been hidden beneath it. Patterns are easier to ignore when they're isolated. But once you see repetition, you can't unsee it. Then came the letter. It arrived in a plain white envelope with no return address. I recognized the handwriting immediately. Melissa's. My hands trembled as I opened it. The paper inside was folded neatly, the ink slightly smudged, as if she had paused often while writing. I know you'll never forgive me, it began. I'm not asking you to. But there's something you deserve to know. Something Mom made me swear never to tell you. The next lines changed everything. It's about Dad. He didn't leave because he didn't love you. He tried to get custody. Just you. Mom threatened to accuse him of abuse if he didn't walk away. He left to protect you. I had to stop reading. My father left when I was 6. That was the story I had grown up with. He had abandoned us. He had chosen freedom over family. My mother had repeated it so often it felt unquestionable. But according to Melissa, there had been a custody battle, a threat, an ultimatum. He had died 8 years ago. Cancer. my mother had known. She had attended the funeral alone. She had come home and never said a word. When I confronted Melissa during a supervised meeting arranged by our attorneys, she didn't hesitate. "It's true," she said quietly. "I found out when I was 18. Mom slipped during an argument. She made me swear not to tell you. She said it would destroy everything." "Destroy what?" I asked, my voice shaking. "Our image," Melissa replied. "Her image." The room felt airless. My father hadn't abandoned me. He had tried to take me away from what he saw, and my mother had weaponized that love against him, just as she had weaponized Melissa's insecurity against me. Grief hit me in waves. Grief for the years I thought I wasn't wanted. Grief for a man who had loved me enough to disappear rather than risk harming me. Grief for a childhood narrative that had been shaped by someone I trusted without question. But beneath the grief, there was something else. Relief. Someone had seen me. Someone had tried. The investigation into my mother expanded after that. The charges against her grew to include reckless endangerment and obstruction. The prosecution began to see not just a moment of manipulation, but a decades-long pattern of emotional control. For the first time in my life, I understood something clearly. I had never been invisible. I had been deliberately diminished. And now, piece by piece, the truth was surfacing not just about the fall down the stairs, but about every small fracture that came before it. The staircase hadn't been the beginning of my story. It had been the moment the lies could no longer hold. The day of the court hearing arrived faster than I was ready for. By then, I was 8 months pregnant. My body had mostly healed, the bruises had faded into faint yellow memories. The fracture in my shoulder had mended, but emotionally, everything still felt raw. Some mornings I would wake up certain of my decision to press charges. Other mornings I would stare at the ceiling and wonder how a family could collapse so completely in less than a year. Daniel drove me to the courthouse. He kept one hand on the steering wheel and the other resting gently over mine, as if grounding me in something solid. Outside the building, reporters stood clustered near the steps. The story had drawn attention not because it was dramatic in a sensational way, but because it was disturbingly familiar. A family fractured by manipulation. A pregnant woman pushed down a staircase. A mother accused of orchestrating the breakdown. Inside, the air felt sterile and heavy. Melissa sat at the defense table with her attorney. She looked thinner than I remembered, smaller somehow. The confidence she used to carry like armor was gone. She avoided my eyes at first, staring down at her clasped hands. My mother sat a few seats away with her own attorney. Her posture was rigid, her face carefully composed. If you didn't know the story, you might have mistaken her for someone wrongfully accused. She wore the same expression she used to wear at school, meetings measured, dignified, controlled. The judge entered, the room stood, and suddenly, everything that had felt chaotic for months narrowed into a single, formal proceeding. Melissa's attorney spoke first. He acknowledged the recording, the medical reports, the paternity results. There was no attempt to deny what had happened. Instead, he framed it as a moment of emotional collapse fueled by severe anxiety and manipulation. He presented documentation from her therapist, confirming a long history of obsessive jealousy and insecurity issues that, according to him, had been exploited. When it was Melissa's turn to speak, she stood slowly. Her voice trembled at first, then steadied. "I hurt my sister because I believed lies I should have questioned," she said. "I let fear control me. I let someone else's voice become louder than my own judgment." She didn't look at our mother when she said it. "I don't expect forgiveness," she continued. "I know I don't deserve it, but I will accept whatever consequences the court decides." The judge listened without interruption. When she finally spoke, her tone was firm but not unkind. "No amount of emotional manipulation excuses pushing a pregnant woman down a flight of stairs," she said. "However, the court recognizes the documented psychological vulnerability involved and the influence exerted." Melissa pleaded guilty to assault, causing bodily harm. Her sentence was structured but serious. 18 months suspended, meaning she would serve no prison time unless she violated probation. 5 years of supervised probation. 200 hours of community service. Mandatory psychiatric treatment. restitution covering my medical expenses and counseling costs, and a 5-year restraining order prohibiting any contact with me. As the judge read the terms, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Relief, sadness, finality. Melissa looked at me once before sitting down. There were tears in her eyes, but no anger. Just something hollow. Then it was my mother's turn. Her charges included reckless endangerment, obstruction of justice, and evidence tampering related to the deleted email drafts and coaching statements captured on the recording. Unlike Melissa, she had negotiated a plea agreement prior to the hearing. The prosecutor outlined the evidence methodically. The forwarded email from Mark's account, the deleted drafts written in my name, the text messages encouraging suspicion, the instruction to Melissa to claim I had tripped. The earlier bicycle incident surfaced as contextual evidence of pattern, not to retry the past, but to establish history. By the time the prosecutor finished, the courtroom felt impossibly quiet. My mother stood when asked to address the court. She spoke clearly, evenly. "I regret that my actions contributed to a misunderstanding," she said. "My intention was to protect my daughter's marriage." A misunderstanding. The word hung in the air like smoke. The judge's response was sharp. "This was not a misunderstanding," she said. "This was calculated interference." The court rarely sees such sustained emotional manipulation within a family dynamic. Under the plea agreement, my mother received 2 years of probation, a $15,000 fine, 300 hours of community service, mandatory counseling, and a permanent public record of the conviction. No prison time. Given her age and lack of prior criminal record, incarceration was deemed unnecessary. As the gavel fell, something inside me settled, not in triumph, but in clarity. Outside the courthouse, reporters waited. Microphones were extended toward me as Daniel and I stepped through the doors. "How do you feel about the verdict?" one asked. I paused, considering the question carefully. "I don't feel victorious," I said finally. "I feel free." That was the only word that made sense. For most of my life, I believed I wasn't enough. Not soft enough. Not emotional enough. Not needy enough. I believed something about me required constant adjustment to deserve love. What this process revealed painfully and publicly was that I had been navigating a narrative built around control. Justice didn't erase the damage. It didn't undo the fall. It didn't bring back the years I spent questioning my own worth. But it did something else. It documented the truth. Melissa left the courthouse with her attorney. No family members waited for her. My mother walked out separately. A few distant relatives lingered nearby, whispering quietly. Some offered tentative nods in my direction. Others avoided eye contact entirely. Reputation, I learned that day, is fragile when built on performance. In the weeks that followed, I focused on preparing for my daughter's arrival. Therapy became part of my routine, not because I felt broken, but because I wanted to ensure I didn't carry any of this forward unconsciously. Daniel attended some sessions with me. We talked about boundaries, about patterns, about what kind of family we wanted to build. Melissa sent one letter after the hearing. I didn't open it. Not yet. Maybe someday. Maybe never. My mother didn't write at all. People sometimes ask if I feel anger. Of course I do. Anger for the risk my daughter was exposed to. Anger for the years of subtle comparisons. Anger for the truth about my father that came too late. But beneath the anger is something steadier. Understanding. Melissa is responsible for her actions. My mother is responsible for hers. The court made that clear. And I am responsible for what happens next in my own life. The hearing didn't feel like revenge. It felt like a line drawn in permanent ink. For the first time, I wasn't shrinking to preserve harmony. I wasn't softening the story to protect someone else's image. I was standing in the full light of it. And that, more than the sentences or the fines, was the real consequence. 8 months after the court hearing, my daughter turned 1. Her name is Emma. Sometimes I watch her sleeping and still feel a quiet disbelief settle over me. There was a moment on that staircase when both of us could have disappeared from this world before she ever took her first breath. And yet here she is, warm and stubborn and very much alive, with Daniel's steady eyes and a laugh that fills every corner of our small house. Daniel and I got married quietly 2 months after Emma was born. No elaborate ceremony, no extended family, just a courthouse, two close friends as witnesses, and vows that felt less like promises and more like choices we had already been making every day. It wasn't dramatic, it was peaceful, and after everything that had happened, peace felt like the most luxurious thing in the world. Our home isn't large. The kitchen counters are often cluttered with bottles and tiny socks. There are nights when Emma refuses to sleep and mornings when I wake up more exhausted than I ever did in my old office job. But the chaos in this house is honest. No one is performing. No one is competing. No one is trying to manipulate the narrative. I haven't spoken to my mother since the day of the hearing. Melissa has written 4 letters over the past year. They sit in a drawer in my bedroom, unopened. I don't know what they say. Apologies, maybe. Explanations. Regret. I haven't decided if I'll ever read them. Forgiveness is complicated, and I've learned it doesn't have to be rushed to be real. My mother hasn't written at all. Through distant relatives, I've heard that she still insists she did nothing wrong, that she was misunderstood, that everything spiraled beyond her control. For a long time, that would have triggered something in me, an urge to correct, to argue, to defend my version of events. Now, I feel something different. Detachment. Not cruelty. Not indifference. Just distance. The restraining order remains in place. The probation terms are still active. But those legal boundaries are almost secondary to the internal ones I've built. The real shift wasn't the court ruling. It was the moment I stopped needing her to admit the truth in order for it to exist. On Emma's birthday, after our small celebration ended, and the last friend left with leftover cake wrapped in foil, I sat alone at the dining table with her baby book open in front of me. I had been filling it out carefully over the month's first smile, first tooth, first wobbly steps holding onto the couch. That night, I wrote something different. You were born from love, I wrote slowly. Not obligation, not comparison, not fear. You will never have to compete for my affection. You will never be asked to shrink so someone else can shine. You are seen exactly as you are. As I put the pen down, I realized something I hadn't fully allowed myself to say before. The cycle stopped with me. It's easy to talk about breaking generational patterns in abstract terms. It's harder to do it in daily practice. It means catching yourself when old instincts surface. It means noticing when you want to withdraw instead of communicate. It means resisting the urge to measure one child against another, even in small, harmless-seeming ways. Emma is still too young to understand any of this, but one day she will ask about extended family. One day she may ask why she doesn't see her grandmother. When that time comes, I won't lie. I won't poison her with bitterness either. I will tell her that sometimes adults make harmful choices, that love without accountability isn't safe, that protecting yourself is not the same thing as being unkind. There are moments when grief still surprises me. A memory will surface: my mother, braiding my hair when I was little. Melissa and I laughing over something trivial, and I'll feel the ache of what could have been. It would be easier if my childhood had been entirely terrible. But it wasn't. There were warm pieces mixed into the damage. That's what makes it complicated. Therapy has helped. So has time. So has the steady presence of Daniel, who never tries to fix my emotions but always listens when they surface. He reminds me gently that what happened was not a reflection of my worth, that I don't have to earn safety anymore. Sometimes I still replay the fall in my mind. Not the violence of it, but the moment before the split second where I could see in Melissa's eyes that she truly believed I was her enemy. That memory doesn't make me angry anymore. It makes me aware of how powerful narrative can be when it's repeated long enough. But here's the truth I hold on to now. Narrative can be rewritten. Not by pretending the past didn't happen, not by denying harm, but by choosing different behavior moving forward. A few weeks ago, I opened the voice memo app on my phone, the same one that had recorded the confrontation and preserved the truth. I pressed record again. Note to self, I said quietly. Today I choose peace. It sounds simple, almost cliché. But peace is not passive. It's an active decision. Every day. It's choosing not to reopen wounds just to prove they existed. It's choosing boundaries over access. It's choosing relationships built on transparency rather than obligation. I don't know what the future holds for Melissa. I hope she continues therapy. I hope she rebuilds a healthier version of herself. I don't wish her harm. I just no longer allow her proximity. As for my mother, I've stopped imagining scenarios where she apologizes perfectly and everything is restored. Closure, I've learned, doesn't always come from the other person. Sometimes it comes from recognizing that their inability to change does not require you to stay. Emma toddles into the room now as I'm speaking, clutching a stuffed rabbit by one ear. She looks up at me with absolute trust. That trust is sacred, and protecting it is the most important role I will ever have. If you've listened this far, maybe you've recognized pieces of yourself in my story. Maybe you felt invisible in your own family. Maybe you've been cast into a role you didn't choose. I want you to hear this clearly. There was never something fundamentally wrong with you. You were responding to the environment you were placed in. Healing doesn't mean pretending the harm didn't happen. It means refusing to let it define the rest of your life. My sister pushed me down the stairs because she believed a story that wasn't true. My mother helped write that story, but I chose not to keep living inside it. Today, my daughter sleeps in a house filled with laughter instead of tension, and that is enough. If this story resonated with you, if it made you feel less alone, I invite you to subscribe to Henjiwie Iyagi. We share stories of resilience, truth, and quiet strength because sometimes the bravest act isn't revenge. It's choosing to build something better. This story was never just about a fall down the stairs. It was about what happens when suspicion is fed, when comparison is repeated, and when love becomes conditional. It was about how easily a narrative can be built inside a family, and how devastating it is when that narrative turns one sibling into a villain and another into a weapon. But more than that, this video is about accountability. It's about recognizing manipulation, documenting the truth, and choosing to step out of a cycle that may have existed long before you were born. If you saw yourself anywhere in this story, if you've ever been misunderstood, compared, minimized, or blamed for something you didn't do, I hope you take one thing with you. You are not defined by the roles others assign to you. You are allowed to set boundaries. You are allowed to protect your peace. Thank you for listening, for staying, and for feeling this story with me. If stories like this resonate with you, stories about truth, resilience, and quiet strength, please subscribe to Hanjiwie Iyagi, because sometimes healing begins with hearing that you're not alone.